And now move over BRICS. Here come the MAVINs. 6 countries betting on commodities over the next 10 years. The combined economies of these countries could be 60% of America's GDP. Without further ado, the MAVINs are Mexico, Australia, this sounds like a game show, Vietnam, Indonesia, Nigeria, and South Africa. And we even got the flags. Joining us is Joe Weisenthal, the Business Insider deputy editor who co-authored the list. And yes, MAVINs is great. I mean, Meet the MAVINs. It's better than Meet the Parents. Joe, good to have you with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
What do these 6 have in common, and how do they differ in terms of when you're saying this is why it's an opportunity compared to the well-known BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China?
So the theme we were looking for, I mean, first of all, the BRICS story isn't over, but the theme we were really looking for is what are going to be the next emerging markets that people are going to get excited about. And so kind of what we tried to do is find countries that are in some way levered to global growth through commodities and exports, but also have an interesting domestic story to tell through rising population growth and emerging middle class, stuff like that. So for the most part, these countries fit that very well.
Okay, so let's get into a few of these.
Sure.
Specifically. I'm curious about your Nigeria. Let's just start with Nigeria, since obviously it's getting a lot of conversation right now, given the fact that the man who tried to bomb Flight 253 was from Nigeria. Nigeria is upset it's going to get a bad reputation. It wants to be one of the world's biggest 20 economies by the year 2020. Do you buy it?
I don't know about by the year whether it's going to be one of the world's largest economies by the year 2020, but you know, I would ignore the current situation right now. You don't want to be if you're an investor, you don't want to be thinking about a long-term bet based on an incident that happened in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, none of this is going to go in a straight line, but they have a very fast-growing population. They have a government that is more committed than in the past to liberalizing the economy. And they're just a monster when it comes to oil. So if they play their cards right, that's going to be a huge source of cash flow for them. Potentially, they'll have the ability to deploy that into other areas. And yeah, we think it's going to be a major story, one of the big success stories in Africa over the coming years.
And what about Indonesia? You know, it's a pretty incredible story. Obviously, one of the most populous countries in the world, majority Muslim country, but it's in Southeast Asia, and one of the most populous Muslim countries in the world. But they don't have oil. They did, but they really don't have any left, right? So what's the logic there?
Right. Oil isn't the story, but they still have tons of commodities, tin, copper, other industrial commodities like that. Very well access to China. It's just going to be a huge story, them selling to China over the next several years. And the country, again, this is another one of those countries where if you kind of look at the past over various years, some years you'd think it's on the verge of collapse, and some years they're doing very well. So it's one of these things that one of these countries where it pays to not really get paid too much attention to the short-term political trends and to just see the huge story of the emerging middle class in Indonesia, kind of all of Southeast Asia for that matter. Similar story to Australia in terms of selling to China. Very huge potential.
And what about Vietnam? Now you're starting to see Vietnam a whole lot more than made in China. Obviously, a few decades after the war, we are now, what, their largest trading partner?
Yeah, I mean, in Vietnam, the story isn't so much about the commodities like the other ones, although more about the high-value exports. You say there's so much made in Vietnam that you see these days. But then there's also other strategic, very ports and what that'll allow their manufacturing sector to continue to grow for some time. And again, we think the government, I mean, you know, it's kind of like China where they're managing this tricky transition from a sort of authoritarian, centrally planned economy to something more open.
Right.
For now, they're doing very well, and we expect that to continue. And again, just a very strong domestic story as well.
It's one of the most amazing places ever to visit as well. All right, thanks so much, Joe. We appreciate it. And now you've met the MAVINs. Get ready for that trend of the next decade.